Good afternoon and a very big welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited to have you. And let's get right to it. Hello and welcome. My name is Althea Rowe. Thank you for joining us for this 30-minute webinar in our Research to Policy Critical Conversations in Language Education series. This year's theme is Safeguarding Opportunity for Multilingual Learners in Shifting Policy Contexts. Today's webinar is Understanding and Advocating for High-Quality Instruction for ELLs with Disabilities. We will be speaking with Dr. Sarah Kangas, Associate Professor at Lehigh University, and Dr. Teresa Moen, bilingual speech-language pathologist and postdoctoral scholar at Arizona State University. I'm joined by Dr. Maria Adelaida Restrepo, Professor and Chair in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the University of South Florida, and board member for the Center for Applied Linguistics, and Dr. Deanne Hunter, who is a member of the Cal Assessment Development Team that works in partnership with WIDA at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website at the conclusion of the event. You can activate closed captioning by pressing the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. This event is provided as a public service. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed belong solely to the guest speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of our organization. Our panel comprises esteemed experts who work at the intersection of research policy and practice in language education, language access, and equity. You can learn more about them on the webinar's webpage. This page will be shared in the chat. If time allows, our speakers will answer questions from webinar attendees. Please use the Q&A box to share your opinions with us. We will answer as many questions as at the end of our discussion. You can also use the chat button at the bottom of your screen to share your thoughts and comments anytime. You can try it out by letting us know where you're joining us from today. I will now pass the webinar over to our facilitators.
Thank you, Althea, very much. I'm very excited to have our discussions today. And I will start with my first question to both of you. What recent policies changes have you seen in respect to high quality instructions for ELLs with disabilities, particularly related to the language of instruction?
Teresa, would you like me to go first in answering?
Yeah.
Sure. So I would say that we're not really seeing large scale changes to state policy, but we are seeing policy changes in terms of what schools and districts are grappling with. And in particular, the rescinding of the Dear Colleague letter that was issued in 2015, the recent rescinding of that in the past year has really created a lot of confusion in our LEAs about the necessity of having high quality instruction, particularly services for our multilingual learners or MLs with disabilities. So there is kind of a reinvigorating of confusion debate around, do these students still need access to both sets of services in the wake of the rescinding of the letter? That letter to me is one of our most important policy guidance documents that we have in ML education for this group of students. So the rescinding of it is a significant challenge, a policy challenge for our schools and our districts in continuing to provide both sets of services.
Teresa?
Yes, I'd agree with Dr. Kangas, and that contributes to then further exclusion of our ELL students from services for those that have disabilities. And so we continue to see this population be underdiagnosed or underrepresented in special education, but then on the other side of things, overrepresented in special education. There tends to be issues on both sides with school personnel maybe delaying assessments for students because it's maybe a wait and see approach, wanting to make sure that students are learning maybe they're just learning English as a second language, but that shouldn't create a hesitancy in assessing if there are academic concerns. And so I think that contributes to that as well.
All right.
Thank you both so much. So our second question kind of piggybacks off of that and extends to how, in your experience, have you seen these policy changes impacting the education in the context where you work? So we'll inverse the order. We'll start with Dr. Bowen, and then we'll go to Dr. Congas.
Sure. Yeah. So thinking about Dr. Kangas mentioned this about how policies, we know that they differ from district level to state level to federal level. So within the confines of certain states, there's often kind of workarounds that you might have to do for those students. So for example, in Arizona, there's still currently an English only policy in place. And so recently the team that I work with at Arizona State, we tried a pilot program for using dual language education, using a bilingual push-in program within a special education classroom as kind of a way to work around the confines, especially with what the teachers understood, the confines of the English only law. And so oftentimes those changes impact the education of the ELLs in that context, that the teachers might feel hesitant to use another language in practice if there's an English only policy in place. And so it often comes down to being creative and finding solutions within those restrictions. I'll pass it to Dr. Kangas.
My more recent work has focused on policy changes around services that are particularly in individualized language plans. So what my work has focused on is a policy change where states or districts are trying to develop individualized language plans, and sometimes they have other names for them, like English Learner Success Plans or language acquisition plans. But the aim of the plans is really to provide more of a tailored approach for instruction and support. How this is relevant to MLs with disabilities is that a lot of times these documents are provided to students when they're not making gains in their English language proficiency on whatever state assessment whatever assessment states have designated. And so these children then are given individualized language plans or ILPs to help provide more targeted or tailored support for their English language proficiency and help kind of boost their trajectory in the language. So this is a more of an innovative policy change. Some states have been doing this for quite a while, but more recently, states and districts that are even in states that don't mandate these are kind of using these plans as a way to enhance the services that MLs with or without disabilities receive. They're a lot like, if you haven't heard of individualized language plans, they're a lot like the documents in special education IEPs, but their focus is specifically on English language development, and all of the document really orients around that. So it's like a carbon copy of an IEP, but with more of an adjusted focus on English language proficiency. And similarly, there is a team that takes up many times a team that takes up implementing these plans. So this is more of a policy change that I've been seeing that does kind of converge for MLs with disabilities and try to enhance their access to high quality services, but more broadly just instruction.
Thank you both. And now, okay, the next question is, what policy changes would you like to see to meet the most immediate needs of multilingual learners with disabilities? And I guess we'll start with Dr. Kangas this time.
Sure. At this point, I would love to see the debates on access to both sets of services. And when I say both sets of services, I mean language learning services and disability related services, special education and related services. I would love to see the debate about whether MLs with disabilities really need these services, those debates to end. We've been debating this for a long time. The Dear Colleague letter intended to kind of put that debate to rest and specify that these services are both required for this group of students, necessary for their academic and linguistic development. And really importantly, they're not interchangeable. And so one of the challenges we see, especially when MLs have more significant cognitive disabilities, is they don't get the language services they need, whether it's English language development, especially they don't get bilingual access to bilingual services. And one of the common rationales is like, well, special education trumps language learning, or special education is more legally significant than language education. And that's just not true. I would love us to move past those myths, those debates, to really see how the child overall would benefit from having access to both sets of services and high quality instruction. I like to think of it this way, that when they have high quality language instruction, they will benefit more from their special education and related services. And in turn, when they have access to special education services and the related services, that should also support and kind of help them facilitate their language acquisition. So I see them as being integral to one another, and would love to see those debates kind of be put to rest.
I couldn't agree more. In the field of special education and specifically speech and language, we often hear this dichotomy of difference or disorder, right? And in Dr. Kangas's book, which is referenced in our handout, she talks a lot about the same phenomenon, different name, but like a language or disability filter, which is this pattern of inequity that we see our ELL students falling into. And so we don't want to have that debate. We know that students may in fact require both language and special education services, and they have the right to receive both of those. And I think a change to policy that could help meet needs of these students is even small changes to the current home language surveys. So all states have to use home language surveys, which are generally 3 to 6 questions in length, and they usually consist of questions like what language was first spoken by the student, what language is spoken at home, and what language does the child speak most frequently, for example. And if any response to that is a language other than English, the child is typically then given the English language proficiency assessment of the state or of the region, depending on where they are. And so right now, I think that simple questionnaire could be really expanded to be more detailed, and also parents could be better informed of the purpose of that home language survey, that we could use as a way to not only screen proficiency, but also language and potential education concerns as well. And that way we're not maybe putting students on a track that then it's hard to undo, or hard to get them the services that they need or the programming that they need. So I think that would be one route we could take to start to avoid that misclassification that often happens with these students.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, so kind of our last and kind of big picture question that we'll probably spend a decent amount of time on is, what actionable policy changes would you recommend that could be put in place in the future that could really broaden access and make education more socially just for these students? We'll start with Dr. Moen.
Sure. So when I think about actionable changes, something that we often, as an SLP in the schools, I often didn't see was a connection between the bilingual language learning, like through the dual language teacher or the English language EL teacher or the ESL teacher, and special education. I remember it was striking to me that the EL teacher was not at the table with us at the IEP meeting. And so thinking about how language goals for building English, but also building the home language, as well as special education goals, they should all be discussed in the same forum with the same team. And so this idea that, like Dr. King has said, these individual language plans and individualized education plans, ideally, they're kind of merging into one, or being able to be addressed all together. And I know this is something that Dr. Higgis, you've talked about, and I'd love to pass it to you to talk more about it.
Yeah, I think that I think we kind of have so much fragmentation going on with the children, and silos that are a significant barrier to us. And I think the teams kind of represent that. As Dr. Moen said, sometimes language specialists or ML teachers don't have a seat at the table for an IEP for an ML with disability. And yet, that's so important for making sure that plans address the student more holistically. One of the reasons I think that we have language plans being implemented is because the IEPs are really not making much of a connection to language, and they're kind of seen as a document that's only about disability, um, even though there's a lot of significant implications that language learning has for a student's disability, but also there's the interaction of the two. So if we really believe that language learning and disability are interacting with the child within a child, to me, it conceptually doesn't make sense to have an IEP only, so strictly address disability. IDEA is very broad in its mandate that teams really just they need to consider, quote unquote, the language and cultural background of the students. There's a lot of variety in understanding what does consider mean. Does it mean that we think about it, we talk about it in a meeting? Does it mean that it shows up in the contents of the document where we can kind of see it that, yes, this is a document for a multilingual child? Hoover and colleagues have a really neat study, I think, that helps IEP teams really evaluate whether the documents are kind of void of connection to language or disability. Like, we shouldn't be able to read the document and have no understanding that this is for a multilingual child. It should be evident to us that this is for a multilingual child. So I would argue for more robust interpretations of what IDEA is calling on teams to do. And I think that if those plans more authentically address language learning and disability, there may not even be a need to have an individualized language plan. In my own research, we're seeing children have multiple plans, but the plans are not really coming together in a way that's coherent. Again, we kind of fragment all these different important services and supports out, and then we have different teams supporting the needs, and that can really challenge our efforts to make more holistic access for language services and supports. So I think that bringing these important team members together to have these documents better guide the child's learning more holistically would be an important policy change.
Thank you both so much. All right. We can go ahead and transition into taking questions. It looks like we've got quite a few that have been submitted through the Q&A function in Zoom. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to start with the very first one and work my way down. So this first question asks about which disabilities are being treated for multilingual learners and I would perhaps extend this question a little bit, which disabilities are you seeing the most underserved for multilingual learners?
So I take the first question to mean, like, what are the most common identified disabilities? Is that the way we're understanding it? Yeah, so the most common, in fact, like 1 in every 2 MLs with a disability will have a specific learning disability of some type, followed by speech or language impairment, which I'm sure Dr. Moen can provide a lot of insights into. I think it's like 1 in every 4 or 5 MLs with a disability will have a speech language impairment. I think one piece that I don't think gets enough attention is that many of our MLs with disabilities have multiple disabilities, and that they have the primary identified disability as a specific learning disability, an SLD. But many of the children that I work with, they have 2, 3, 4 identified disabilities. Very common to have like ADHD as another common identified disability in addition to specific learning disability. So those are the most common. Dr. Moen, I'd love to hear your thoughts about,
Yes.
like, how do you see that certain kids being underserved in
Yes.
particular?
I think for speech in the schools, it's labeled as speech language impairment,
Mhm.
but that encompasses speech sound disorders, developmental language disorder, even fluency disorders. They're all usually under kind of this big umbrella of speech and language. And what's difficult is the disability itself is rooted in language. And so when you have an emergent bilingual speaker, you sometimes there's cases of underdiagnosis and overdiagnosis, like I mentioned before, which I can go into a little bit more. So a child learning English as a second language, let's say, may have difficulties and error patterns in learning that second language. And that may be wrongly ascribed to that status as a second language learner. And that can lead school personnel to delaying an evaluation. So let's say a child is having difficulties, but their kind of label as a second language learner would maybe delay, which would cause an underdiagnosis of developmental language disorder. Whereas sometimes their errors that they're experiencing, that they're showing while learning a second language, could be maybe wrongfully ascribed to a disorder. They think the school personnel might think that there is, in fact, a speech language disorder. And so that causes overdiagnosis because the signs in second language acquisition and language impairment often present very similarly. And so I think that's where often these children can kind of fall into either crack of being underidentified or overidentified with speech and language. The same thing could be said with speech sounds, right? Sometimes you have languages that do not have shared phonemes, right? And so if a child is having certain error patterns in English with English phonemes, but those phonemes don't exist in their home language, that could look like they're presenting with a speech sound disorder, but in fact, they're just acquiring those sounds still because they weren't in their phonemic repertoire yet. And so I think that's where we often see difficulties in correctly and accurately diagnosing students, not only just in how they're presenting, but also we have a very limited amount of ideal assessment resources for students. There are some for Spanish English speaking students, but very few for other languages. And so I think that's where it becomes difficult to tease apart what's going on, if there truly is a language disorder there or not.
Teresa, I think that your comment makes me think about the question. So, like part of the question was underserving. So there's underserving in the sense of what you're talking about, like
Yes.
misidentification.
Yeah.
And we're essentially underserving a child that has a need and we haven't identified it correctly. And then we're also seeing research emerging that we can have the two labels assigned to children and still be underserving them,
Yes.
especially when the children have more significant cognitive disabilities or they have autism, for example.
Yes.
A lot of times the language needs are, oh, well, maybe they'll get the language needs served in by a speech
Yes.
language pathologist. So we don't need to provide language services for their language learning. And
Totally.
so we see that underserving happening there too.
Yes. And with that too, I think there's often a hesitancy sometimes to have bilingual speech therapy. For example, let's say a child is in fact getting both services, but there might be this idea of, oh, well, we don't want to cause confusion, which we know is a myth, right? We know that individuals with disabilities, including disabilities that impact language, like a language disorder, for example, students can still become bilingual, right? And so there's many studies that show that. And so I think sometimes parents are steered away from dual language education, or they have to choose between dual language education or special education when the child has the right to both. And so that's, I think, a way too that there's an underserving happening, that students often require that bilingual therapy, and either due to lack of access or lack of interpreters or lack of just personnel, that often happens.
Thank you. Yeah, I just a comment, but we often see that they are steered because there's not the personnel to provide those
Right.
services. So that becomes a perpetuating issue. All right, I'm gonna go with the next question. Who is leading the implementation of the EL student plans, and how is accountability presented to a team when a student is not making adequate progress academically or in language acquisition?
So I would say that like who's implementing the plans I think varies. Certain states have mandated like language teams essentially, or individualized language teams or language acquisition teams, whatever you want to call them. And they're the group, and it's kind of like an IEP team. They're supposed to be interdisciplinary. Of course, it would include like an ESL teacher or a language specialist, but general education teachers as well, for example. And they're together responsible for implementing the supports for the child throughout the day. But I have seen in more practice that the plans fall on the shoulders of one person, which we wouldn't want, right? Because then that's indicating to us that when that person's not there, those supports aren't being provided, right? Or may not be provided very well. And so that can happen sometimes where the ESL teacher is kind of the de facto implementer of the plan. We wouldn't want that because, again, they're supposed to be guiding the child's education throughout the whole day. In terms of accountability, the states that mandate these plans, there are some associated benchmarks that districts are supposed to work towards. Like there's a state that there's a state context that I'm doing a study in where the state really outlines, okay, these are this is the progress a child really should be making or the children should be making, and the team really strives to make that progress with the child. And by the end of the year, they really have to evaluate whether the child's met those goals. In terms of what's the accountability after that, I would say there isn't any. It's really supposed to be this mechanism to help move the child forward, but I don't see any kind of negative consequences coming back to the team or even the child for not making progress.
Thank you both. So the next question is actually related to professional development and professional development opportunities for educators. So I see a lack of professional development at the intersection of special education and multilingual learners. So the services that provide both of those needs. So how would you suggest educators in different settings start really advocating from that role, maybe providing additional opportunities for professional development, any resources you can recommend to give educators the resources they need to support these students?
That's a great question. What first comes to mind is I'm hoping everyone reads Dr. Kangas's book. I think it's a great tool for educators and for everyone from school administrators to SLPs to EL teachers. There's something helpful for everyone. But that question makes me think a lot about how we talk a little bit about how kind of sometimes are in silos and how students the title of the book is called Promoting Equity for Multilingual Learners with Disabilities, I believe. And it's it is in the handout that will be emailed to you all. Yes. I believe. Is that right, Dr. Hunter? Yes. Great. And so I think, but thinking about making changes in the nuclear school level, I think increasing that collaboration and communication between team members is maybe a really good place to start with advocating for that intersection. I feel like the intersection can't happen unless people are talking with each other, like the language specialist, the SLP, the special educator. But yeah, Dr. Kangas, do you have any other things that could be actionable?
Well, I do see that when we have professional development, we tend to have professional development along our disciplinary silos. And so the ML folks go there and they do that, and the special ed folks go there and they do that. And opportunities where we can bring those two departments together to me is amazing and is much needed. And we see that at the state level too. Like state folks don't always get that time together across the different units, and yet we're expected to do these enormously important things with these groups of students, but we have no time together. So I would love to see district leaders who head up ML education or special education think about, could there be at least one professional development opportunity in a year where we can come together and have that be joint, since we all have so many unique needs that we have to focus on within our area of expertise, but thinking across the departments to pick one time where folks can come together to have that time together and to focus on these critical topics. Maybe you focus on IEPs, or maybe you focus on more coordinated supports or issues of advocacy that need to come up, like the question alludes to. I would love to see more of that FaceTime together.
All right. Do we have time for one more question?
Unfortunately, it looks like we don't. It is 4:29 and the webinar ends at 4:30. But we do thank you all for asking such great questions. We'd also like to express a great thank you to our speakers today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share such great information with our audience. Thank you to our facilitators. You did great moving the webinar along and asking questions, and everyone was so engaged with this webinar. There were so many questions. I hope that you will return for the next webinar. Audience, please watch your emails for a recording of today's webinar. And with that, we'd like to thank everyone for being here today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.